Hi, and welcome back to Kohelet. So here's where things start to take a negative turn. Here's where things start to go a little bit dark. We discussed previously that Kohelet was engaged in this examination of life's experiences to see whether he could engage in them in a way that brings him ultimate satisfaction. And he tried many different things. He realized that even this effort to achieve satisfaction is ultimately a frustrated effort, almost as if God had set it in this world to frustrate people's drive. And when he attempted to achieve satisfaction through various different means, whether it was pleasure, amassing ownership of vast quantities of things that can bring him pleasure, whether it was pursuing wisdom in its own right, whether it was using intelligence and wisdom to pursue pleasure, whether it was combining those two together, intelligence and wisdom, whether it was living in the moment like a fool and just achieving satisfaction, attempting to achieve satisfaction through pleasures in the moment, none of them ultimately brought in satisfaction, as we discussed previously. What happens when your attempts at achieving something and at achieving satisfaction are frustrated? You begin to detest and to hate that experience. And so he says, "V'sanesi es hachaim, ki ra alai ha'ma'aseh shenasa tachas hashamesh, ki hakol hevel u're'us ruach." And I detested life, because bad to me are the occurrences that happen under the sun, because all is vain and empty striving. So he tried all of these things. He attempted all of these avenues at achieving satisfaction. None of them work, and now he's completely frustrated, and he begins to hate the entire experience. A couple of different interesting points here. Number one, hamasa shenasa, kira alai hamasa shenasa. It was bad to me, the occurrences that happen under the sun. One way to translate hamasa are the occurrences that happen out there in the world. The other way to translate it is the things that are done. And we already discussed that often in these verses, Kohelet is juxtaposing and looking at both the events that occur outside in the world that are not under our control, and also at the efforts that we expend, at the things that we do or that people out there in the world do. And he sees how both of those things are ultimately frustrating and meaningless and absurd. And so the two ways of translating hamasa asher nasa are the occurrences that happen and the things that are done. Another point worth noting is kira alai hamasa asher nasa. Bad to me were the occurrences that happened. The reason they're bad is because they're bad to me. The occurrences, the experience of negativity is my own, meaning I'm the one that experiences these things negatively. Of course, when they happen out there in the world, they're objective reality, they're not negative. But they're negative to me. Why? Because I attempted to pursue them as a means of achieving satisfaction. And I expended all of these efforts that have been described in the previous verses. And because all of these efforts were ultimately frustrated, therefore, these experiences became bad to me, the one who has been attempting to pursue them as a means of achieving satisfaction. Now, you can say, well, then, if your own efforts are the things that cause you to be frustrated and to detest and to hate the experience, then don't attempt to achieve satisfaction. Don't attempt to pursue all of these things as a means of gaining ultimate satisfaction. Just live in the moment and be happy in the moment, and don't try to achieve all satisfaction through all these things. But we already discussed that, right? He had already attempted to live like the fool and just live completely in the moment and just enjoy the temporal satisfaction in the immediate moment. And that didn't work either, because ultimately he realized that the fool is not as well off as the wise person who pursues things more wisely. And the fool loses out in many different ways. And so living ultimately just in the very moment without thinking didn't really work. And so he had attempted to achieve satisfaction through wisdom, through intelligence. That hadn't worked either. He had attempted to combine the two in harmony. That hadn't worked either. He had attempted to use intelligence as a means of amassing ownership of lots of different things and achieving pleasure. That hadn't worked either. He had already tried all of these things, and none of those things worked, because whichever avenue he went down, ultimately he reached a dead end in ultimate satisfaction. And so now the only way to look back at these things is in frustration and to hate the entire experience. The words ruach riach, we already discussed this briefly. It can be translated many different ways. It can be a broken spirit. It can be a frustrated striving. It can be a striving after air, after emptiness. all really the same concepts, but different translations of the word, which makes it actually a quite interesting concept because you can translate it in many different ways, all of which are really the same thing. Like I said, many times you can see that this is really a poetic way of writing these, of expressing these ideas, and it was often intentionally done in ways that can be translated in many different ways, and that you need to use your mind to understand what's really being said. And through doing that, and through playing with the words, and through working through these verses, that's how you really gain an understanding of these concepts, and they sort of, in a sense, become your own. On to the next verse, Yod Ches, verse 18. V'sanesi ani es kol amali she'ani omel tachas hashamesh she'ani cheni la'adam she'yeh acharoi. And I detested all my efforts that I expended under the sun, that I should leave them to a person that will be after me. So now he's turning back and looking at all of those efforts that he himself had expended, right? The prior verse was about the things that happen out there in the world and life itself. And now he's looking back at all of those efforts that he has previously expended toward achieving material pleasure, material possessions, temporal pleasures, and he's looking back at all of those efforts, and he's detesting those efforts themselves. Why? Because he has to leave them ultimately to another person. As he's engaging in the efforts, he has control over them, and he can pursue them intelligently or unintelligently. He can put in more effort or less effort, but once he's gone, all of those possessions and all of those pursuits and all of those efforts remain, but they turn over to somebody else and to things over which he has no control. And that too is frustrating. Note also how it says in this verse, V'sanesi ani, the double me, the double I. And I hated, I detested all of those efforts, because here he's looking at himself, at his own efforts. So there's the double I. Next verse, 19. Umi yodea hachacham yeh osachal, v'yishlat b'chal amali she'amalti v'shechachamti tachas hashamesh. Gamzeh havel. And who knows if they'll be wise or fool, and they'll have control over all the toil that I labored and wisely under the sun. This too is havel, emptiness, vanity, frustration, absurdity. So here I am engaging in all of this thoughtful and intelligent effort and labor to amass pleasures and material ownership of possessions, and at the moment of death, I lose control over them, and they pass on to somebody that I have no control over, who may be a complete fool. There's no way to guarantee that that person will continue the efforts that I have put into these things and the things that I have achieved. Now, suppose that I could guarantee that the person who takes over my possessions after I'm gone continues the efforts and the labors that I engaged in, and does it wisely, does it intelligently, uses them to similar ends. Perhaps then my efforts will not have been in vain. But the truth is that that can't be controlled. And there's no way, it's just as easily possible that as soon as I lose control of these possessions, somebody will come along who's a complete fool and turn the entire thing upside down and use them for a complete other purpose, and ends that completely frustrate all of the things that I did all of my life. Perhaps if I could put in effort for half my life and then enjoy those things the other half, maybe that would be some sort of way to get around this. But of course, that's not really possible too, right? You have to put in effort and intelligence up until the last moment. And all of that effort that goes in, the return that you're getting for that effort is, in a certain sense, minimal, because you have to keep on putting in effort up until the very last moment. But then everything that's left goes right over to a situation and to perhaps people that use them completely in opposition to everything that you stood for or that you expended over them. And so that too is havel. It's absurdity. So that's another translation of the word havel. We talked about how the word havel is an interesting word. It has many different translations, many different facets of the same concept: vanity, emptiness, meaninglessness, nothing, air, vapor, and so on. Another translation is absurdity, foolishness, almost in a way. It's complete absurdity, kind of like the existentialist philosophers use the term absurd, meaning it's something that makes no sense. We live in the world, and the only way we live in the world is in a manner of making sense of things. Our entire existence perpetuates and revolves around things making sense, around things having a purpose, around things being in pursuit of a goal, around there being other concepts that involve meaning, which we'll look at later in the book. But it all revolves around meaning and purpose. And yet when you examine it closely, the meaning falls apart. Everything turns absurd. The meaning and the purpose and the goal is, when closely examined, absurd on its face. And that too is part of the term havel. And if you haven't noticed yet, two of the main themes in the book are effort and wisdom. He keeps coming back to these topics from many different angles, and that's because, of course, effort is everything that we're doing here in this world. It all involves effort. Without effort, everything falls apart. And the only way to engage in things is through effort. And the only way to expend effort is through having a goal, which by definition involves meaning, involves purpose. Purpose means expending effort towards something that will have a return later on. And so everything really revolves around effort. And then there's wisdom, which in a certain sense is almost like the other side of the same coin, or the same side of another coin. Wisdom is also a kind of effort, meaning we expend mental effort, we do things intelligently, we do things wisely, we do things in a calculated way that's designed to achieve certain ends, to reach certain goals, to avoid certain negative outcomes. All of that is a manner of intelligence and wisdom. And intelligence and wisdom is looked at as a positive pursuit, right? It revolves around doing things in a way that reach an ultimate goal, in a positive way, in a good way, in a way that achieves an outcome that's desired. So in that sense, wisdom is also a kind of effort. It's a positive and a wise and an intelligent effort. And so everything people do is either through effort or through intelligence and wisdom and thinking about things. And both of those things seem to have a purpose, seem to have a certain positivity. And yet when we really look at them and examine them closely, they both involve some sort of absurdity. And that's what Kohelet is doing here, examining the absurdity and the meaninglessness behind our efforts and behind wisdom. And there's a lot more to come, and he does it in many different ways and many different levels and from many different directions. But here he is in these verses looking at effort and intelligence and noticing how they are ultimately absurd.